Okay, so you're here for the deep dive, right? And that's what we do. We take all the stuff you guys send us, and we just kind of boil it down to the really good stuff, so you can learn quickly and really get a powerful grasp of what really matters.
Yeah.
And so today we are going to be diving into Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins, and we're not just gonna give you inspiration. We're really gonna try to get to the core of it, the actionable stuff, the mindsets that you can use right away to actually grow as a person. So we'll be hitting a bunch of stuff, like decision-making, beliefs, values, even your emotions. It's going to be great.
Yeah, this is a really rich source, especially for, folks like you who are trying to just get to the essence of things quickly. And Awaken the Giant Within really does give you this this really well-structured way of understanding, all those inner workings that drive our lives. It's not really about airy-fairy theory. It's about what you can actually do and apply, which I think you'll really appreciate.
I think so too. So one of the big things that I saw in there is this idea of standards, right? Raising your standards, but then also really believing that you can meet them. And actually, Robin says, straight up, anytime you sincerely want to make a change, the first thing you must do is to raise your standards and believe you can meet them. I think that's so powerful, and especially for you, if you're always trying to process new stuff to get better, it's not just about wanting things to be different. It's about setting a higher bar for how you think, for what you do, for what you even expect from yourself. And that belief, that's what keeps you going when things get tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's you're not just hoping for things to change. You're making a choice to demand more from yourself, and that belief, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. If you really believe you can meet those higher standards, well, you're just so much more likely to actually do what it takes and keep pushing, even when it's not easy, right? But I do wonder, though, do you think people sometimes get hung up on which standards to raise first? Where do you even start,
That is a great point, yeah. And that maybe ties into another big concept from Robbins, which is what he calls the 3 decisions that control your destiny. He's talking about what you decide to focus on, what things mean to you, and then what you're actually going to do to get the results you want, right? So for you, since you're trying to cut through all the noise and get to what matters, consciously choosing where to put your attention, that is huge. And then when something happens, how do you interpret it? Is it a roadblock, or is it a chance to learn something? That makes a big difference in what you do next, right? When you make these 3 decisions consciously, you're really in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you're totally right. And what's so fascinating is how these decisions, they all kind of feed into each other, what you choose to focus on, that's going to shape how you interpret stuff, right? If you're always looking for problems, you're going to find them everywhere, even when they're not really there, But if you're focused on what's possible, well, that's going to lead to more positive interpretations and ultimately actions that actually get you somewhere. It's all connected.
Totally. And that actually leads us right into what Robbins calls the ultimate success formula. It's really a simple loop. Decide what you want, take action, notice what's working and what's not, and then just adjust your approach. Keep tweaking it till you get there. And for you, since you value efficiency so much, this is gold, right? It's all about trying things out, learning fast, and not getting stuck on something just because you've already put time into it. If it's not working, move on, try something else.
I love that. And, sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. This formula, it works for anything you want to achieve, and it really shows how important it is to actually be doing stuff, not just thinking about it. And that part about noticing what's working or not, that's key. It stops you from falling into that trap of keep doing something just because you've already invested in it, even if it's not getting you anywhere. For someone who's all about efficiency, it's about being smart with your energy and your time, right?
Totally. Okay, so now let's go a little deeper, okay? Robbins has this idea of what he calls the master system, and it's basically 5 things that influence your whole experience of life. So we've got your core beliefs, those are those kind of unconscious rules you have, your values, obviously, your past experiences, which he calls references, then the questions you habitually ask yourself, and then, of course, your emotions, right? And he says that if you can change even just one of these things, it can like really shift things in your life. And for you, I think, you like to understand how things work. So looking at these 5 components, it can really show you how they all like interact to create your reality.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And, it's where we move from like big strategies to like really looking at the details of how you work on the inside, right? And
Yeah.
each of these 5 parts, it's like a filter that you see the world through. So, like, for example, your beliefs, they affect what you value, and that then influences the questions you ask and how you feel. It's all connected. And for someone like you who, loves to figure out complex systems, this is like a huge opportunity to make some really targeted changes. But I'm curious, which of these 5 do you think people are like the least aware of in their own lives?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think maybe it's those unconscious rules, the ones we don't even realize we have, but they're like driving so much of our emotional reactions to things. And, speaking of emotions, Robin talks a lot about pain and pleasure as like the ultimate motivators, right? We're always trying to move towards pleasure and avoid pain. It's just how we're wired. And he has this term emotional threshold, which is basically the point where the pain of like saying the same becomes bigger than the pain you think you'll feel if you change. And that's when you finally take action. And then there's these neuroassociations, which is how our brain connects certain experiences with like really intense emotions. And those associations, they shape how we act in the future. But it's interesting how often we choose like comfort in the short term, even if it means missing out on something better in the long run. But Robin says that it's not actually reality that drives us. It's our perception of reality and our beliefs about what will be painful or pleasurable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important distinction. Our brains, they're designed to seek out pleasure and avoid pain, but those pathways, they're often shaped by like our past experiences and what we've learned to associate with pain and pleasure, right? And the emotional threshold thing, that explains why like someone might know intellectually that they need to change, but they won't actually do it until like staying the same becomes too uncomfortable. And then those neuroassociations, man, those can be strong. Like they can drive our habits even when those habits aren't good for us anymore. Like think of someone who's terrified of public speaking because of one bad experience like years ago. That association can be really hard to break.
Exactly. And that brings us to like the whole idea of beliefs, right? Robin says that beliefs are basically the stories we tell ourselves about the world and about ourselves in the world. They're how we interpret what happens to us, and they guide us towards what we think will bring us pleasure or keep us away from pain. And a lot of times we don't even realize we have these beliefs that are running in the background, and they can come from, stuff that happened to us when we were kids or even just misinterpretations of things. He talks about global beliefs, which are these big general statements we make about ourselves and life, like I'm not good enough or life is unfair. And he uses this really cool analogy of like a tabletop. So the tabletop is the belief and the legs holding it up. Those are what he calls references. And those are all the experiences and information that seem to like confirm that belief. So the more references you have and the stronger the emotions tied to them, the more solid that table is, right? He even breaks down further. Like there's opinions, which are kind of weak, then beliefs, which are stronger, and then convictions, which are like unshakable. And that all depends on how much evidence you have and how strongly you feel about it. And he even says you can create a conviction by starting with a belief, looking for things that support it, having some kind of like intense emotional experience that reinforces it, and then taking action based on that belief. Pretty powerful stuff.
I love that tabletop analogy. It's so visual, right? It makes it really easy to understand how beliefs are built and how they get stronger over time. And for you, always analyzing stuff, think about how you like gather those references. Are you actively looking for information or are you just kind of letting it come to you? And are you like only paying attention to the stuff that already fits with what you think? Because being aware of how this all works is the first step to choosing beliefs that actually empower you.
Absolutely. And one really cool way to develop those empowering beliefs is by doing what Robbins calls modeling success. Basically, he says that if someone else can do something, there's a good chance you can too, if you can understand how they do it. And really important, what they believe that allows them to do it. And he actually shares some questions that he asks himself every day. What did I learn today? What did I contribute or improve today? What did I enjoy today? I think those are like such great questions to ask yourself regularly, especially for you who loves to learn new things. It helps you focus on growth, on giving back, and just like feeling good about what you're doing.
I love that. Modeling is really about like finding patterns in success. If you can figure out the mindsets and the beliefs of people who are already killing it, You can kind of like borrow their frameworks and apply them to your own life. And those questions that Robbins asks himself, they're designed to make you think in a more positive and growth-oriented way. It's about reflecting on what you've learned, what you've given back, and how much you enjoyed the process. That's what keeps you going, right?
Absolutely. Now, Robbins also talks about this technique called neuroassociative conditioning, or NAC for short. And basically, it's like intentionally rewiring your brain to connect pleasure with the things you want to do and pain with the stuff you want to stop doing. But he says that for this to really work long term, you got to have three core beliefs about responsibility. You got to believe that something needs to change, that you're the one who has to change it, and that you actually can change it. Without those beliefs, it's probably not going to stick.
Right. And SC is like taking that pain pleasure principle and actually using it to your advantage. And for someone like you, who's all about efficiency, think of NAC as like a way to create these shortcuts in your brain so you can get to the outcomes you want without having to like constantly use willpower. But like you said, that personal responsibility piece is huge. You can't just go through the motions. You got to really believe that change is necessary, that you're in charge of making it happen, and that you can actually pull it off.
Exactly. And, speaking of taking action and being focused, one of Robbins' big principles is focus on where you want to go, not on what you fear. He talks about how our thinking is basically just asking and answering questions all the time. Yeah. And the quality of those questions, that determines the quality of our lives. And he breaks it down into three ways that our questions impact us. They direct our focus, which then affects how we feel. They determine what we don't pay attention to. And they shape the resources that we can access. He even suggests like paying attention to the questions that people you admire ask themselves. What are they focusing on? What are they curious about?
That's so interesting. The questions we ask ourselves, they're like this internal search engine, right? They point our attention in a certain direction, and that shapes how we see things. If you're always asking questions that highlight your fears or what you think you can't do, well, that's all you're going to see. But if you start asking empowering questions, questions that focus on your goals and what's possible, that opens up a whole new world of possibilities and solutions. And for you who values clarity and understanding so much, being able to ask the right questions, that's a game changer.
No doubt. And he also talks about something that might seem kind of small, but it's actually really powerful, and that's the words we use, our vocabulary, especially when it comes to emotions. He says that the words we use to describe how we feel actually affect how we experience those emotions. So like having a richer vocabulary for emotions can lead to a richer emotional life, and we can actually choose our words to like shape our thoughts and feelings.
That's so true. Language isn't just about communicating with other people. It's also how we talk to ourselves, right? And the labels we put on our emotions, they can either make them feel bigger or smaller. So by expanding your emotional vocabulary, you can get a much better understanding of what's going on inside you, which is so helpful for like self-awareness and being able to manage your emotions.
Right. Now let's talk about goals. Robbins says that setting goals is like the first step in taking something that's like intangible, just an idea, and making it real, something you can actually work towards. But he says you got to follow that up with a plan and then actually take action, lots of action. And he also reminds us that it's not just about reaching the goal, it's about how you feel and what you experience along the way that's important too. And then he comes back to this idea of values, saying that at the end of the day, all our decisions come down to what we really value. He talks about living in line with our highest ideals, not just focusing on what we want to have, but who we want to be. He calls values our internal compass. They show us the direction we should be going. And he says that a lot of times when we struggle to make decisions, it's because we're not really clear on what our values are. He even makes this distinction between means values, which are the things we use to get what we want, and ends values, which are more about like our ultimate state of being. And he says that the hierarchy of our values, it's like constantly influencing our choices, even the small ones, because our brain is always trying to figure out if something will lead to pleasure or pain based on those values.
Right. Goals give you the map, but values are the fuel that keeps you going, and ultimately they determine where you end up. When your goals and values are aligned, it means that what you're striving for actually matters to you, so you're more likely to stick with it. And understanding the difference between means and ends values, that can save you a lot of time and energy because you're not chasing things that you think will make you happy but actually won't. And that hierarchy of values, it's like this hidden force behind so many of our decisions, even the ones we don't really think about.
Totally. And building on values, Robbins talked about rules, empowering rules and disempowering rules. These are like internal guidelines we make based on our values that tell us when we should feel good or bad. Disempowering rules, those are the ones that are impossible to follow, where they depend on things you can't control, or they just make it really easy to feel bad and hard to feel good. So he says, design rules that are empowering, rules you can actually follow, that you have control over, and that make it easier to feel good. He even reframes anger, saying that a lot of times it's not just about someone else doing something wrong, it's about them breaking one of our own rules. He says there's a difference between must and must never rules, which are like our absolute limits, and should never rules, which are more like preferences.
Yeah, it's like our rules are the operating system for our emotions. And disempowering rules, they just cause unnecessary suffering and keep you from experiencing joy. So when you take the time to like really look at your rules and redesign them, you can start to have more control over how you feel and create a system that actually supports your values and goals. And thinking about anger as like a response to our own rules being broken, that's a really powerful shift in perspective, right? It can help you react in a more constructive way.
Totally. Okay, and finally, Robbins comes back to this idea of references, those past experiences and all the knowledge we have. He says that having a wider range of experiences and more positive ones, that gives us more choices and makes it easier to interpret things in a way that empowers us. And he reminds us that it's not just the experiences themselves, it's how we interpret them that matters. So he encourages us to like actively seek out new and different experiences and to organize our memories and knowledge in a way that supports what we want to achieve. And here's something really cool. He says we can even like borrow the references of other people by learning from their experiences and what they know. And he ends by saying that, limited references lead to a limited life, so we should always be looking to expand our horizons.
I love that. Our references, they're like the foundation for everything we understand about what's possible, right? And when you have a wider range of experiences and knowledge, you can think more flexibly, you're more resilient, and you're better at coming up with new ideas and being able to like borrow references from other people. That's like a cheat code for growth, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, consciously expanding your references, that's an investment in a richer, more fulfilling life for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to this really important point about identity and how it relates to change. Robbins says that we always act in a way that's consistent with how we see ourselves, with our identity. So when we start to cultivate a new sense of self, our actions naturally change to support that new identity. And he says that if you've been trying to change something and you keep failing, it might be because what you're trying to change clashes with your deeper beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of.
Right. That makes so much sense. Our self-concept, it's incredibly powerful. If you want to make a lasting change, you often have to change how you see yourself. If you don't believe that you're the kind of person who can do the thing you're trying to do, you're going to face a lot of resistance. Real transformation, the kind that sticks, it often involves redefining who you believe yourself to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful takeaway. So, as you're thinking about all of this, remember that this deep dive into Awaken the Giant Within, it's not about like changing your life overnight. It's about understanding what drives you, what makes you tick, and having the tools to consciously create the life you want. It's about taking control of your decisions, your beliefs, your values, and yeah, even your identity.
Totally. And by getting a grasp of these core principles, you're not just learning what to do, you're understanding why you do things. It gives you the power to go beyond just reacting to life and to actually design the future you want.
I love that. So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Think about Robbins' master system. Again, those 5 components: your beliefs, values, references, the questions you ask, and your emotional patterns. Which one of those, if you could just shift it, do you think would create the biggest positive ripple effect in your life? Which one would make the biggest difference in how you learn and grow? Spend some time with that question, really explore it. And thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you on the next one.